The Whitmore mansion stood like a fortress of glass and steel at the edge of the Hudson, its mirrored windows catching the last blush of sunset. From the outside it looked like a palace ready for celebration. Strings of silver balloons lined the gates, a red carpet stretched across the steps, and caterers in black uniforms rushed about, polishing champagne flutes and rearranging trays of hors d'oeuvres no one had yet touched. But inside, the silence was suffocating. In the ballroom, crystal chandeliers spilled golden light onto rows of tables decorated with imported roses, gift boxes stacked like trophies, and a three-tier cake that gleamed under its sugar-dusted perfection. Yet every chair was empty. Every invitation that had been sent weeks ago to classmates, to colleagues, children, to society's finest families had been politely declined. At the head of the room sat Leela Whitmore, her small body folded into a motorized wheelchair, 12 years old that day, dressed in a lavender gown that shimmered faintly when she moved. Leela looked like a doll left forgotten in a corner store. Her legs, covered in soft fabric, didn't move. They hadn't moved since the accident a year ago. Her dark eyes scanned the emptiness before her, then lifted toward the staircase where her father stood, jaw clenched. Charles Whitmore, the billionaire CEO, wore a tuxedo sharp enough to cut stone. His hair was slicked back, his shoulders squared, his whole being radiating power except for the storm burning behind his eyes. "This is absurd," he muttered to his assistant who trailed nervously behind him. "Not one person could bother to show after all the money I spend keeping those parasites afloat." The assistant fumbled with a clipboard. "Sir, I think many parents were hesitant because of, well, Lila's condition." Charles spun on him, voice like a whip. "Her condition? My daughter is not a disease. He stopped, realizing his tone had echoed across the marble hall. His daughter had heard him, her head tilted slightly down, her hands twisting in her lap. The billionaire exhaled through his teeth. He had built empires, crushed rivals, bent the stock market to his will, but here, faced with his child's loneliness, he was powerless. From her wheelchair, Lila whispered, "It's okay, Daddy. They just forgot." The word sliced him open. No, he thought, they didn't forget. They chose miles away, in a cramped apartment in the Bronx. A boy pressed his face to the cracked window and watched the evening shadows swallow the street. Malik Carter, 13, tall for his age but still lean, had grown used to the rhythm of sirens, laughter, and fights drifting up from the block. But that night, something tugged at him, a conversation between his mother and a neighbor, carried through the paper-thin walls. "The Whitmore girl's birthday today," his mother said. Whole mansion lit up, but I heard not a soul showed. "Rich folks got all the money in the world, still can't buy kindness." The neighbor snorted. "Good, those people don't care about us. Why should anyone care about them?" But Malik stopped listening. Something inside him tightened. He knew loneliness, the kind that burned worse than hunger. His father had walked out years ago. His mother worked double shifts at the nursing home. Friends came and went, and when the world forgot you, birthdays turned into just another day circled on a calendar no one read. He glanced down at the ragged sneakers on his feet, then at the street outside where kids played ball with dented cans. The thought rose, uninvited, daring, and ridiculous. What if I went? An hour later, the Whitmore estate's iron gates loomed before him. He had walked all the way, nerves rattling with every step. His sweatshirt was faded, his jeans patched at the knees. Against the backdrop of black-suited chauffeurs and polished limousines parked in neat rows, he looked like a shadow that didn't belong. The guards eyed him instantly. "Hey, kid, wrong place." But Malik swallowed, lifted his chin, and asked the words that would change everything. "Can I join the party?" The guards laughed. One shook his head. "This ain't a soup kitchen. Go home." But from an upstairs window a pair of dark eyes caught the scene. Lila's. She leaned forward in her chair, heart pounding at the sight of the boy, the first child her age to appear at her birthday. Her lips parted. A whisper escaped, almost prayer-like. "Please, let him in." And in that fragile moment, two worlds, one of glass towers, one of cracked sidewalks, collided. The guards at the Whitmore estate smirked at Malik as though his very presence were a crime. One of them, a broad man with a jaw like a bulldog, stepped forward. "Listen, kid. This ain't Halloween. You don't just knock on doors and ask for cake. Move along." Malik's throat tightened, but he stood his ground. I just thought maybe she shouldn't be alone." The guard froze for a second, caught off guard by the sincerity in the boy's voice. But before he could respond, the air shifted. A deep voice rolled down the staircase of the mansion like thunder. "What's going on here?" Charles Whitmore himself descended the marble steps, every movement precise, every glare sharp enough to slice steel. His tuxedo glimmered faintly under the floodlights, and his polished shoes echoed against stone. The billionaire CEO did not often step outside to handle trifles, but tonight, with his temper already frayed by humiliation, he wanted blood. The guard straightened. "Sir, this boy." Charles's gaze dropped onto Malik for a moment. The man simply stared, eyes narrowing with disbelief. A black boy in street clothes stood before his mansion, asking entry into a world that was never meant for him. "What are you doing here?" Charles's voice was low, dangerous. Malik swallowed hard. His fists balled at his sides, but his voice didn't crack. "I came to wish her happy birthday, your daughter." The silence that followed was crushing. One guard stifled a laugh. Another muttered, "Unbelievable." Charles's lips curled into a sneer. "My daughter's birthday is not some charity event. You think you can walk off the street and then—" Faint but clear came another voice. From the window above, delicate but determined, "Daddy, let him in." Every head turned upward. There, framed by the glow of chandeliers, Leela Whitmore sat in her wheelchair, her face pale but resolute. Charles stiffened. His jaw twitched as if he'd been struck. "Lila," he said sharply, "this boy doesn't belong here." But Lila's hands gripped the arms of her chair. No one else came. Her voice trembled, yet it carried more weight than any boardroom decree. "Please, just him." Charles's chest rose and fell, torn between his pride and his daughter's plea. He hated being cornered, but more than that, he hated the look in her eyes, that fragile spark of hope he had not seen since the accident. Finally, with a sharp breath, he gestured curtly. "Fine, let him in, but he won't be staying long." Malik's heart pounded as the gates creaked open. He stepped forward, feeling the weight of 100 unseen judgments pressing down on him. As he entered the mansion, all marble floors and towering ceilings, he knew one thing: nothing about his life would ever be the same again. The ballroom smelled of roses and sugar. Malik's sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, his reflection flashing under the chandelier. His wide eyes scanned the scene, a cake bigger than his kitchen table, tables groaning with food he'd only seen in commercials, and yet silence. Empty chairs stretched out like a taunt. At the far end of the hall, beneath the glow of golden lights, sat Lila. Up close, she looked both delicate and fierce. Her gown shimmered like frost, and her dark hair curled neatly against her shoulders, but her legs, stiff beneath the fabric, didn't move when she shifted. Her eyes locked on his. "Hi," she whispered. Malik managed a small smile. "Happy birthday." Something in her face softened, as though those two words, spoken by someone who meant them, had breathed life into her chest. "Thank you," she said. "You're the only one who came." The words cut Malik deeper than any insult he'd ever heard. From across the hall, Charles watched like a hawk, his glass of bourbon untouched. His assistant leaned in. "Sir, perhaps this isn't quiet." Charles snapped. His eyes never left Malik. Every instinct screamed to throw the boy out, to protect the lines that kept his world orderly. Yet there was his daughter, smiling for the first time in months, because of a stranger who had no right to be here. Charles's chest burned with conflicting fires. Pride, rage, fear, and beneath it all, something else. Something he refused to name. As the night stretched, Malik did what no guest, no friend, no classmate had bothered to do. He made Leela laugh. He told her stories about his block, about the old man who sold snow cones year-round, about the stray cat that thought it was a dog. He mimed basketball moves, stumbling clumsily until she giggled so hard she almost tipped her chair. For once, the mansion's echoes weren't empty. But each time Malik glanced up, Charles's cold eyes met his, and the warning was clear. One step too far, and you're gone. At last, the cake was rolled forward. The candles flickered in the vast, empty hall. "Make a wish," Malik said softly. Leela closed her eyes. Her lips moved without sound. When she opened them, Malik asked, "What did you wish for?" She hesitated. Then, quietly, "That you don't leave." Malik's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say, but before he could answer, Charles rose from his chair, voice slicing through the moment. "That's enough." Everyone froze. Charles strode forward, eyes locked on Malik like a predator. "The show is over. Boy, you've had your fun. Now it's time you learned your place." The guards moved toward Malik. Lila's face drained of color, and in that instant, the fragile bubble of joy burst, leaving only fear, power, and the crackling tension of a war about to ignite. The guards closed in on Malik, their heavy steps echoing against the marble floor. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, but her voice failed her in the tension of the moment. Charles's presence towered over the scene, his rage concealed beneath a mask of calm authority. Malik's instinct screamed at him to run, but he stood still. His gaze flicked to Lila, whose eyes pleaded with him not to go. That look anchored him more than any guard's grip could. Daddy, please. Lila's voice finally broke. Don't make him leave, please. Charles froze, his jaw tightening. He had always prided himself on control, yet his daughter's plea cut deeper than a corporate betrayal. He turned his head toward her. Lila, this isn't how it works. People don't just walk into our lives like this. Her hands curled into trembling fists. But no one else came. No one. He's the only one who cared enough. The words hung in the air, pressing against Charles's armor of pride. His gaze shifted between his daughter and Malik, whose dark eyes burned with both fear and defiance. For a long, unbearable moment, the air seemed to stop moving. Let him stay, Lila whispered again, softer this time, but with a determination that startled even herself. Charles exhaled sharply through his nose. His hand flicked at the guards. Fine, he can stay. But remember this, you are a guest in my house. Boy, you will behave accordingly. One wrong step, and you're out. The guards hesitated, then retreated. Malik breathed out slowly, his body trembling though he tried to hide it. Lila's lips curled into the faintest smile. Relief washed over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The next hour unfolded like a strange dream. Malik sat across from Lila at the long table, where plates of untouched delicacies gleamed under the light. She insisted he try the food, tiny cakes dusted with gold, fruits so ripe they melted on the tongue, meats prepared in ways he'd never seen. Malik chewed cautiously, feeling the weight of Charles's eyes boring into him from across the hall. Yet, as the moments passed, Malik began to forget the stares. Lila asked him questions no one else bothered to. About school, about his mother, about what he liked to do on weekends. He answered honestly, telling her about basketball in the street and the library where he hid when he wanted quiet. She laughed at his descriptions of the neighborhood characters, her laughter fragile yet real. It was the first time in months that the mansion heard the sound of her joy, but Charles did not share it. From the shadows he watched the two children like a man, watching a thief rifling through his safe. His assistant leaned in. Sir, perhaps it's not so bad. Not so bad, Charles hissed. This intruder is sitting at my daughter's table. Do you understand what that means? The Whitmore name cannot afford scandal. The assistant nodded nervously but said nothing more. Lila asked Malik if he wanted to cut the cake with her. He agreed, moving to her side. The knife trembled in her small hands, so Malik placed his over hers, guiding the blade gently through the sugared tears. Together they pulled away a slice, setting it on a plate. Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling with a joy her father hadn't seen since before the accident. And that was when Charles snapped. That's enough. His voice cracked across the hall like a whip. Malik jumped, nearly dropping the plate. Lila's face strained of color. Charles strode toward them, his fury no longer contained. You've made your point, Lila. He's been here long enough. Guards, no, Lila cried, her voice shattering. You can't. But the guards moved in again, seizing Malik by the arms. He struggled, but their grips were iron. Charles's gaze bore down on him like a sentence. You don't belong here. Not in this house, not in her life. Leave. Rain had begun to fall outside, tapping against the tall windows as Malik was dragged toward the door. His chest ached, but not from the guard's grip, from the sight of Lila, her face pressed with tears, her lips forming words he could barely hear. Don't go. The doors slammed shut behind him, leaving Malik out in the cold, his breath fogging in the wet night air. He stood there a moment, rain soaking his sweatshirt, his fists clenched. For the first time, he realized how much it hurt, not for himself, but for the girl who was trapped in that golden cage of loneliness. Inside, Lila's chest heaved. Her small hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair so hard her knuckles whitened. Charles reached for her, but she pulled back. How could you? He was the only one. The only one. Charles's voice faltered. Lila, you don't understand. I understand everything, she snapped, her voice breaking under the weight of grief. Then her body slumped, pale and fragile. Her head fell back against the chair as her eyes fluttered shut. Lila. Charles's roar shook the hall. Panic overtook his fury as he called for doctors, nurses, anyone who could help. The mansion erupted in chaos. But amid the shouts and rushing footsteps, the truth lingered like smoke. His daughter's heart had broken in front of him, and all his wealth could not mend it. And on the street outside, Malik walked away slowly, through the rain, unaware that by morning, headlines would carry her story, unaware that fate had tied him to the Whitmores forever. The morning sun rose over New York, but it brought no warmth to the Whitmore mansion. News vans clogged the gates. Reporters thrust microphones through the iron bars, shouting questions about the CEO's daughter. Inside, the atmosphere was darker than the storm that had raged the night before. Lila lay in a hospital bed, her small frame swallowed by the crisp white sheets. Machines beeped rhythmically beside her, wires snaking across her body like restraints. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips pale. She looked even younger than her 12 years. Nurses moved around her with hushed urgency, and doctors whispered in corners. But it was Charles who stood rooted at her bedside, his hands gripping the rail, his face gaunt from a sleepless night. For the first time in decades, Charles Whitmore felt powerless. He had conquered boardrooms, silenced rivals, and manipulated markets with ruthless efficiency. But here, in this sterile room with his daughter clinging to fragile life, he was nothing more than a father drowning in guilt. Remembered the look in her eyes when the boy was dragged away, the betrayal, the grief, the desperate plea he had ignored. That look haunted him more than any corporate scandal ever could. The door creaked open. His assistant entered, holding a phone. "Sir, the press won't stop calling. They're running with the story. Headlines say, billionaire's daughter collapses at lonely birthday. They're painting you as cold, heartless." Charles's jaw tightened. Let them talk. But his voice was hollow. He knew public opinion was a currency he could not afford to lose. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, Malik watched the same headlines play across a flickering TV in his neighbor's apartment. He sat on the couch, rain-damp sneakers squeaking against the floor. The images showed the mansion, the ambulances, the flashing lights. Then a photo of Leela, her fragile frame captured by the paparazzi's merciless lens. Malik's stomach twisted. He hadn't meant for this. He hadn't meant to make things worse. He had only wanted her to smile. "Kid," his mother said softly, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you did more for that girl in an hour than all her father's money ever could. Don't blame yourself." But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he was supposed to do something more, something bigger. That night, he found himself walking again, this time toward the hospital. He slipped past the crowd at the front, finding a side entrance where delivery trucks unloaded supplies. He ducked his head, heart racing, and slipped. Inside, the sterile halls loomed around him, full of nurses and security guards. He kept to the shadows, weaving between carts and gurneys, until he found the elevator and pressed the button with trembling fingers. On the pediatric floor, he crept past rooms until he found hers. The glass window showed Lila pale and still, with Charles hunched at her side. Malik's chest ached at the sight. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, wishing he could reach her, wishing she could see him. But then he heard voices. Not nurses, not doctors, men in suits, their tones hushed but sharp. He ducked into an alcove and listened. "This is the perfect chance. Whitmore's distracted, vulnerable. If we move the stocks now, we can bleed him dry before he even realizes what's happened." Malik's eyes widened. The men were talking about Charles, about betrayal, and if word gets out about how the accident really happened. The first man cut him off quickly, but the words lodged in Malik's mind like a knife. The accident, the one that had left Lila paralyzed. His blood ran cold. Did they mean it wasn't an accident? Malik's hands trembled, but he forced himself to listen closer. The men spoke of a rival, a name whispered like a curse. Donovan Crane, a man Charles had once crushed in business. Now circling like a vulture. "He'll never see it coming," one of the men said with a smirk. "Whitmore's finished." The men walked away, their voices fading down the hall. Malik pressed his back against the wall, his heart pounding. He didn't understand all the details, but he knew one thing. Leela's paralysis wasn't just fate. Someone had done this. He turned back to the glass window, to the fragile girl lying motionless inside. She deserved to know the truth. Later, that night, when Charles finally left her side to take a call, Malik slipped into the room. He moved quietly, pulling a chair close to her bed. Her eyelids flickered, and for a moment he thought she was asleep. But then her eyes opened slightly, and she whispered, "You came back." Malik nodded, his throat tight. "I couldn't stay away." Tears welled in her eyes. I thought I'd never see you again." "I heard something," he said, his voice urgent. "About your accident." "Leela, it might not have been an accident. Someone wanted to hurt your father. And they hurt you instead." Her eyes widened, the faintest spark of fear and anger igniting in them. "Don't know yet, but I swear I'll find out." For the first time since she had woken, color returned to her face. She reached out, her small hand brushing against his. "Don't leave me again." "I won't," he promised. But the promise was shattered moments later when the door burst open. Charles strode in, his face twisted with fury. Voice boomed like thunder. How dare you come here? Malik shot to his feet. Wait, I heard something. Charles cut him off, grabbing him by the collar. You don't belong here. You're nothing but a street rat looking for a way to exploit us. Did Crane send you? Are you working for him? No, Malik shouted, panic rising. I was trying to warn you, they said, but Charles wasn't listening. Rage blinded him, his fear for his daughter twisting into suspicion. The guards rushed in, pulling Malik from the room as Leela screamed, No, he's telling the truth. Daddy, listen to him. But Charles couldn't hear it. Not yet, and as Malik was dragged once more into the shadows, he knew the truth had placed a target on his back. This was no longer about a birthday. No longer about loneliness. This was about betrayal, power, and a crime buried beneath wealth and lies. The days that followed Malik's second removal from the hospital blurred into a storm of fear, whispers, and growing danger. The Whitmore name, once untouchable, now flickered across every news channel with speculation of scandal. Headlines screamed about negligence, cruelty, and unanswered questions surrounding Leela's tragic accident. Stock prices dipped, vultures circled, and in boardrooms across New York, men with polished shoes and sharpened knives plotted Charles Whitmore's downfall. But within the sterile walls of her hospital room, Leela clung to one truth. Malik. She replayed his words in her mind again and again. It might not have been an accident. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, desperate, determined, promising to find the truth. That promise kept her fighting. Charles, meanwhile, spiraled deeper into paranoia. He stormed through corridors, berating staff, demanding silence, refusing to consider that a boy from the Bronx might know something he did not. Yet behind the mask of fury lay a man unraveling, consumed by guilt and fear. He had enemies, too many to count, and in the shadows. Donovan Crane watched and waited. Crane was everything Charles had once been, ambitious, ruthless, hungry. But where Charles had built empires, Crane had built grudges. Years ago, Whitmore crushed his company, leaving him bankrupt and humiliated. Since then, Crane had rebuilt himself, clawing his way back to power. Now he wanted more than revenge. He wanted to strip Whitmore of everything: his wealth, his reputation, his daughter, and Malik had overheard too much. One evening, as Malik walked home from school, 2 black cars rolled up beside him. The doors swung open, and men in suits stepped out. Come with us, one ordered, his hand brushing the outline of a gun. Malik's legs trembled, but he forced his chin up. Running would be useless. They shoved him into the car, the city lights blurring past as the vehicle sped toward Manhattan. They stopped at a towering glass skyscraper, Crane Industries. Malik was dragged upstairs and thrown into a dimly lit office. Behind the desk sat Donovan Crane himself, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, a predator disguised as a gentleman. You've been snooping where you don't belong, boy, Crane said, swirling a glass of scotch. Listening to things that could get you killed. Malik clenched his fists. Why? Why did you hurt her? She didn't do anything to you. Crane leaned back, smirking. Collateral damage. Her father ruined me. Took everything I had. I wanted him broken, helpless. And what better way than through his little girl? The accident was no accident. A carefully planned message. And now the world thinks Charles Whitmore is heartless while his daughter wastes away. Poetic, isn't it? Malik's stomach churned. You're a monster. Careful, boy, Crane warned, his eyes narrowing. You're alive because I'm deciding if you're useful. Tell me, why does a street rat care so much about a billionaire's daughter, hoping for a payout, or is it something else? Malik swallowed hard, his voice steady despite the fear. Because she's my friend, and I won't let you hurt her again. Crane's laugh echoed coldly. You're brave, stupid, but brave. Go then. Warn Whitmore if you want. He won't believe you. He never does. The men dragged Malik out and dumped him on a deserted street, shaken, bruised, but burning with resolve. Malik knew he had to make Charles listen, not for himself, but for Leela. At the hospital, Leela's condition worsened. She woke in the night, screaming, clutching her chest, her monitors blaring. Doctors swarmed, Charles shouting over them, helpless as his daughter slipped further away. When she calmed, she whispered one word over and over, Malik. Finally, Charles broke. Exhaustion and desperation cracked his pride. He summoned his driver, ordered him to find the boy, to bring him no matter the cost. Malik was found hours later, sitting on the stoop of his building, staring at the cracked pavement. When the sleek black car pulled up, he tensed, ready to run. But when the driver said, Mr. Whitmore needs you, he froze. This was his chance. In the hospital suite, Father and boy faced each other. Charles's eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. You said you heard something, he admitted hoarsely. Tell me. Malik recounted everything, the men in the hallway, the whispers of Crane's name, the confession in Crane's office. Every word dripped with urgency, with truth. And as Charles listened, his mask shattered. Rage, grief, and shame collided inside him. He realized he had dismissed the only person who had tried to protect his daughter for the first time. Charles looked at Malik not as a threat, not as a nuisance, but as an ally together. They devised a plan. 2 nights later, Charles announced a public charity gala at the mansion, inviting New York's elite, the press, and even his rivals. It was the perfect trap. Malik, disguised as one of the servers, moved quietly through the glittering crowd, keeping his eyes on Crane. Hidden microphones were in place. All they needed was proof. The night stretched tense and glittering. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and beneath it all, a current of danger thrummed. Then, at the height of the evening, Charles took the stage. Tonight, he declared, his voice ringing through the chandeliers, we celebrate resilience. My daughter, though paralyzed, has shown more courage than any of us. And to those who think they can exploit tragedy, his gaze locked on Crane. Know this, the truth always comes to light. Crane's smirk faltered. He excused himself, slipping into a side room. Malik followed, heart pounding. From the shadows, he watched as Crane spoke on the phone, his arrogance unraveling. Whitmore's finished. The girl was only the beginning. Soon he'll lose everything. The microphone hidden in the chandelier caught every word. Malik signaled Charles, who appeared with security and reporters in tow. Flashbulbs exploded as Crane's words filled the speakers for all to hear. The room erupted. Crane's empire crumbled in an instant. He was dragged away, shouting threats, his face pale with defeat. In the aftermath, Charles returned to Lila's bedside. For the first time in months, hope flickered. The truth was out. Justice was served. And as Malik stood quietly by the door, Charles beckoned him closer. You saved her, Charles said, his voice thick. Not me, you. Malik shook his head. I just did what was right. Charles placed a hand on his shoulder. You did more than that. You reminded me what it means to be a father, to be human. Behind them, Lila stirred, her eyes opening, weak but smiling. She whispered, both of you, stay. And for the first time, they did, together. The story of Malik and Lila spread beyond tabloids, beyond scandal. It became something greater, a story of dignity against wealth, kindness against cruelty, truth against betrayal. In the darkest corners of the city, whispers grew of a boy who stood up to billionaires and refused to be silenced. And in a mansion that had once echoed with emptiness, laughter slowly returned, because one boy dared to ask, can I? And in doing so, he changed everything.